Hello, I'm Keith Richard, Master Casting Instructor with Fly Fishers International, along with A Hero USA, to present to you a short video on how to choose the correct fly line, the correct reel, and the correct rod for the fish that you intend to be seeking. The first thing we need to know before we decide on what rod, reel, or line is best for us is the species of fish that we're going after. As you'll notice here, the weight of the fish, the size of the fish is important. If we're going after tarpon, we certainly wouldn't want to go after tarpon with a 3-weight rod that is designed to handle panfish. So the size of the fish is important. The fight. How much fight is that fish going to have? Is he a fish that is going to run 100, 200, maybe 300 yards like a permit? Then you need a certain reel size that's going to handle that much backing. If it's a panfish that's not going to take out any line whatsoever and just give you a nice fight to the boat, then you don't need a large reel with a lot of backing. You can go with a smaller reel and a smaller rod size to allow for some fight on that fish. So the fight of the fish is important as well. Are we fishing for saltwater or freshwater fish? Saltwater rods are made with slightly different components than freshwater rods. Their guides may be painted. The reel seats may be anodized aluminum or some type of graphite composite, but something that will make that rod more resistant to the harsh conditions of salt water. So whether it's salt or freshwater has a bearing. The lure size. What size lure are we going to be throwing after that fish? Is it a big bass bug? Is it a huge fly, an 8-inch fly, streamer that we're throwing after peacock bass? Well, those large flies need to be cast with larger rods because a 2 or 3 or 4 weight rod will simply not have the heft in order to cast those larger bugs. Contrary to that, if we're casting small midges, say 18, 20, 22 size midges in a large Midwestern river for really selective trout, rainbows that are rising to midges, then we can go with a smaller, a lighter rod weight with the reel that doesn't have quite as much backing again. So all of those conditions determine what type of line, reel, and rod that we're going to use. So let's talk about the line, for example. Is it a large river that we're fishing where we might be making 40, 50, 60-foot casts and we're trying to mend upriver to keep a drag-free drift on our fly? Then that fly line, you might want a fly line that's got an extremely long taper or head to it so that you can mend it. And some of these fly lines may be in the realm of 90 to 105, 110 feet long. A tarpon, for example, if you're fighting a tarpon, you typically don't put a lot of pressure on that fish until you get a couple of coils of fly line onto the reel because you've got a knot between the fly line and the backing. So if you're fighting that fish very hard with the backing away from the reel, you've got a knot there that you've got to hope doesn't break. Once you get that fly line onto the reel, then you're dealing with a fly line that is capable of handling a large fish like a tarpon. That might be a tensile strength of 40-pound test on that particular fly line. So it'd be very, very difficult to break that fly line. Once again, the type of fish that you're fishing determines the type of line. The taper of the line. Is it a fly line that we are going to be throwing a very light bug very gently on the water? Then we want a long, thin taper going out the front head of that taper of that line. If we're throwing a big plug out there, a big streamer, a big popper, then we want something that's got a belly that goes all the way out to the tip and then dramatically decreases all of a sudden to carry that energy to let that loop unroll all the way down. The color of the fly line, if you put 10 people in a room and ask them Does color make a difference? You'll get 10 different opinions probably. And it's my opinion that most of the time, color on the fly line has no bearing on whether you catch fish or not. We use typically bright colored lines like a bright yellow or a bright orange so that we can teach our students. We also, many of us instructors also use the same line in fishing and feel we catch as many fish, just as many fish as the next guy. So there are some that believe that, oh, you've got to have olive green or whatever. It's really your choice. The cost of the fly line can range anywhere from $20 up to $110. So that's always a factor. The fly size, obviously you need a line with a certain amount of heft to it that's going to be able to pull a large bass bug out a ways. Contrary, just as you would with a small midge, you don't need a very line with a lot of heft to it to carry a midge out 40, 50 feet. So the size of the lure can help you determine what fly line you're going to get. How far are we going to be casting? You know, the taper of that fly line is so important. If we're going to be casting and false casting, say 40, 50 feet and shooting to 70 feet, then we want a line that's going to be able to accommodate that. Whether are we mending that line? Is it a big river where we're going to have to mend upstream at 45, 50 feet? Then we might want a line that's got a longer head to it. If we're not mending, then we can use something with a shorter head. Does that line float or sink? Is the fly that we're throwing, are we trying to get 10 feet down and we need a fast sinking line? Or is that fish in a foot of water and all we're using is a floating line? So all those conditions play into what type of line do we get. The reel, obviously the reel has to have a capacity that's going to hold the line for the fish that you're going to be fishing for. If you have a tarpon, for example, that's possibly or permit that's going to take you into 300 yards of backing, you need a reel that's got a small arbor that's going to allow you to put that 300 yards of backing on it, and then some more fly line on top of that, another 100 and 110 feet of fly line on top of that. So the arbor is important, the arbor size. If you have a small arbor on, say, a reel that you're fishing for bass, for example, you're very rarely ever going to get down to the middle or the bottom end of the fly line. So if you have a real small arbor, that fly line is rolled up in very, very tight coils close to that arbor. It's going to come out, if you ever cast a long cast, it's going to come out in very tight coils. So you want something, some backing to fill up that small arbor to get the fly line to roll on that reel with larger coils. So the arbor is important, especially if you're going after fish like permit or tarpon or bonefish that are going to take you into a lot of line. Big redfish, say 20-pound plus redfish, are going to take you into a lot of line. You want a small arbor. Mid-arbor reels allow you to put a little less backing on them, but they accommodate that by making them a little bit wider so that you can put a little more backing than you can with a small arbor reel. But your line will be coiled in looser coils, in a greater diameter coil than a small arbor reel. Aesthetics, you know, a lot of reels are sold simply because they look cute. Are they bar stock or are they made out of cast aluminum? Bar stock is obviously going to be much more durable. Cast aluminum on your cheaper reels, less expensive reels, I should say, you drop those, you may crack them. Again, with the bar stock reels, though, you drop them, the tolerances may be so tight that any little ding will keep that reel from functioning properly. So there may be a trade-off there, but bar stock will tend to be a little more durable against the elements. Your drag, what type of drag do you need? You know, typically, I know some tarpon guys use their hand to accommodate for a drag. They palm their reel to create the drag they want. You may want to get an expensive reel with a really nice drag system to do that for you. Where I find drags more important are for out west when we're fishing for large trout on very light lines, say 4-pound test, and you want to protect that tippet at all costs. And so you want a drag that is going to be reliable, and when that fish runs, it's not going to hang up on you. It's going to be very, very smooth. Is it a saltwater versus freshwater reel? You know, the saltwater reels are typically going to be more expensive. They are typically anodized aluminum, and they may double dip them. So the more expensive reels, because they're built to accommodate the harsh conditions of the saltwater environment, or they have a very good drag system. And again, the cost may be prohibitive. Reels can be quite expensive. You know, your freshwater reels, anywhere from $20 to $100 on up. Your saltwater reels, typically you're going to pay $300, $400, $500, $600 for a good saltwater reel. So the cost is always a factor. The rod, whether you get a 7-foot rod or 9-foot rod or a 10-foot rod, depends on the fish that you're going after. And the type of type of casting you're going to be doing going after that fish. If you're fishing a small stream, you might want to consider a shorter rod, a 7.5-foot rod versus your traditional 9-foot rod, simply because the overhanging limbs may impede you from being able to cast. The action of that rod, we talked about that in another video. Just to reiterate, if you're in a situation where you're going to be fishing in high wind conditions, making long casts, your faster action rods will come in handy. Your slower action rod or mid-flex is more to my liking for general overall fishing. As far as your lift capacity, I'm talking about how much strength is in the butt section of that rod when you try to lift that fish up. You don't want to get a very thin wall graphite rod to lift up a 20-pound redfish. You want to be very, very careful. You want to get one that's built for that. So that all comes with the price tag. Aesthetics, obviously, there are some really gorgeous rods out there, and that sells a lot of rods. How precise does the casting need to be? There are some rods that are just simply built, the way they're tapered will cast beautifully. They will follow the tracking, they will unload very smoothly and land that fly out just like you want it. A good caster can pick up just about any rod and do just about any cast you want to do. You're really splitting hairs when you talk about precision casting. Is it a saltwater or freshwater rod that you're going to be using? Again, the ingredients that go into a saltwater rod are a little more durable than the ones for freshwater. And also, obviously, cost is a factor. You may pay upwards of $1,000 for a good fly rod. So there you have it. If you are in the market for a rod, reel, and line, you first have to know what species you're going after, how much line and what kind of line you're going to be using, whether that reel will accommodate the line that you're using to fish for that fish, and the rod with the proper rod action and lift capacity and right length to do the fishing you want to do, that's going to hold the reel that you're going to have, that's going to hold the line, that's going to get your fly out to your fish. Again, I'm Keith Richard, Master Casting Instructor with A Hero USA, wishing you tight lines and tighter loops.